Gentlemen, that was Stephen Porter, Chief Information Officer at the Touchstone Behavioural Health. And I'm delighted that Stephen Porter is going to remain with us for our next panel discussion. So, gentlemen, kindly welcome on stage the panelists consisting of 8 gentlemen. Will the following please step up and join Steve Porter so that we can proceed? Stephen is going to be joined by T.S. Maglani from India Bulls, Puneet Makoo from Aptara, Chetan Agwal from Jindal Steel, Murali Gopalan from UST, P. Sebastian from Mudra, Anil Shankar from Shoppers Stop, Nirmal Jajodia from NCDEX, and Gaurav Chand from Dell. Gentlemen, will you give them a big round of applause for joining the panel? So the entitlement for this panel discussion is Innovation in Virtual Storage, Overcoming the Data Deluge. So Stephen, over to you and your panelists.
It is a thorny topic. What I'd propose, gentlemen, is that I'm going to toss out a few topics here, and I would really like to see some conversation among the group. We'll get started and then open it up as well to members of the audience. I really see this, though, as being very interactive, that you all have opinions, and rather than trying to pick out any individual, let's just jump in. But kicking off, one of the interesting pieces that we've run across is that it's estimated right now that the amount of information produced in 2011 is about 1,800 exabytes, or 10 times more than what existed in 2006. Why don't we talk a little bit initially about what your environment looks like today, and perhaps some of the pain points that you're beginning to see.
Earlier when Gaurav asked the question, asked people to raise their hands if their data would double in 3 years, I did not raise my hand because my data would grow 10 times in 3 years. And to your question, Steve, some of the reasons why that would happen is the shift in use of video as a business enabling function or technology in a step jump manner than what has been existing so far. We are in IT services, and most communication that happens between us, ourselves, and our customers are limited to the traditional chats and emails and locational video conferences that are not recorded. So what we are seeing is a shift to video meetings that should be recorded for regulation purposes, plus business purposes, and video blogs, then the ever-increasing social microblogging, which requires rapid I/O. So all those kind of new things are going to just increase the amount of data that's going to have to be stored 10 times, and just imagine the problems that's going to create.
Well, we talk of data as being. Guys can hear me? Yeah. You know, the issue with data management comes up with this kind of volumes of data is your archiving, because in a regulated environment, it is assumed that you archive everything. Nobody asks you any longer, do you have archives or not? Irrespective of what the issue involved is, you are expected to archive everything, just like you mentioned about the videos to be recorded in. Now, if you're going to archive everything, or if you're required to archive everything, then the dimension of the problem becomes very, very different. Because I have yet to see at least archive data ever being deleted. I don't know whether I'm wrong in that, but archive data never gets deleted. Therefore, issues of tiered storage or even linear data storage, which is tape, is going to prove the biggest bottleneck in the time to come. I do not see tape surviving beyond 5, maybe 7 years, or till the last tape actually, kind of drops off. But that's going to be the real issue, and this is something which I don't think the industry has yet moved on to address in a major way.
So are we talking about policy requirement or regulatory requirement or both? And can you write a policy that says, I'm just not going to keep it?
I wish I could, but you can't. At least not in my line of business, which is financial services. Goldman Sachs does wish that they never had archived any of their mail, but it's wishful thinking.
And global environments.
And just to add to this complexity, there is another trend which is increasing speed at which you need to kind of look at the data. So even if you were to archive data, I mean, in tapes and stuff like that, does it meet the requirement of looking through? So I think speed is another very important part which is adding to the complexity, as is the fact that for most people now, data is data produced by different systems, heterogeneous systems, but they would like it to be retrieved in a simple way, and therefore the storage is no longer limited to or connected to a single system, and then you would probably look around and stuff like that. So speed and heterogeneity is another challenge that I see.
I think another interesting trend, business trend, is the need for analytics or need for analysis of data. And retailers particularly, if you look at it, they want to track consumer behavior right from the customer kind of shops the first time, and he has kind of the entire life cycle of his behavior and everything. So the need to capture each and every action of the consumer is kind of and that's probably existing or occurring in other industries across also, and that gives a increasing keeps on contributing to the data growth. And talking back about the regulatory requirements, I think in India retailers are required to keep data for at least 7 years, minimum of 7 years, and produce information on demand basis. So you can't even take a decision saying that you can archive it and forget about it. So these are some of the challenges that are coming in.
I guess that's really one of the challenges, though, is converting data, raw data, mountains of raw data, into actionable information. And are the tools there? Do we have the capacity? Because now you're really talking about moving from a real-time storage or a near-time storage into applying yet one more business process to it. So how do you address that?
As far as hard data is concerned, which is numbers and letters and that kind of stuff, there are pretty good tools now available. But if you get into unstructured data, voice, video, other kind of images, etc., I think we're still a bit away from being able to get really robust tools which could be used. One of the projects which would be worth watching for a period of time would be the kind of technologies which are being developed now in India for implementing UID AI, where for the first time they're trying to develop a searchable database of fingerprint and written images. And while it is a very limited subset of all the images that could be there, but it is an interesting experiment which worth looking at.
Yeah, and I mean, this is really the challenge. Probably analytics of unstructured data would be the next big thing. People like Google do it every day. So the indexing and XML-based searching and stuff like that are really the things which I agree have not been addressed the way it should have been addressed. And therefore there is a huge opportunity to address, not just keeping mountains of data, being able to do something worthwhile.
The other thing is, I think data tiering is very important. I think if we can, there's a significant percentage of data which is contributed by unstructured data as compared to structured. And if we can tier the data in terms of analyzing the pattern of the data, I think that will help a lot.
Another very big challenge that a lot of organizations would be facing more and more is, we've talked about various kind of endpoints of computing. We've like gone from the desktop age onto laptops and tablets and smartphones. Now all of them are not just, not only do you use information on them, you even are creating information on them. So what happens is, while we're talking of centralized data centers and centralized storages, we simultaneously need to address the question of how do you actually bring so many of these endpoints into those data centers so that people are not really having multiple places where the information is stored and as many points of failure as a result when it comes to data loss. So, so while on the one side we have a talk of cloud and centralized data centers and everything, and on the other side we have perimeter where various kinds of endpoint information generating sources are coming up. So this is like a dichotomy which the entire storage industry or the entire computing industry has to address. We need solutions and tools around that. So that's like a big challenge that I see.
See, I think the challenges in terms of the whole gamut of information management. When you talk about information management, it starts right from defining a particular policy, not only for your storage, but also retrieval and archival and the purging part of it. Especially things get complicated when you're dealing with multiple types of formats of data, right from, let's take the structured data, the unstructured data, the video, the audio, and now even with the social networking coming in, God knows what new forms of data one could get in. So unless and until there is a clear-cut policy defined within the organization, as some of the panelists said, rightly said, that we keep on archiving the data, but then there is no question in terms of purging it or putting into a cold storage, depending on the access rights, depending on the regulatory requirements, and so on and so forth. So in my opinion, unless there is a predefined policy and there is no common policy which can be adopted across the various verticals, because even with verticals from business to business, it can vary. So unless one has that kind of a focused approach, I'm sure the prices of storage may fall, may like commodities, but still we will, even after 10 years, I'm sure we can still have the same debate, and all our officers will still be debating the same topic.
Just one correction. Prices of commodities are unlikely to fall.
So what I hear, though, is that the complexity required is really going to tax our current workforce. Do you see anything coming from the manufacturers that's actually going to help us use our current skill sets, or are we continually looking for that next superstar to come in and run this department? Is it a self-perpetuating model?
See, one of the interesting things which we are exploring is we are trying to alienate the technology part of it and say that, look, technology is not to be used for technology's sake, but it's for business. So for a moment, forget about the technology part of it. This is a business requirement. Let's look at a particular partner, who can take this headache away and say that, look, you manage it, we don't bother, as long as it meets our business requirements. Because more and more, the moment you get into technology, then all these kind of issues keep on coming up, and then somewhere down the line, one tends to forget the business part of it and get too complex and complicated with technologies.
I would say that having the right partner will help to kind of store the data effectively. But the other part of the problem is prioritizing, understanding which data needs to be retrieved at what speed, and which data can be slower. So from the business perspective, from the IT perspective, I see a scenario where the IT defines along with business as to how important, how fast a data is needed, how is it value added, and actually outsource or give this storage itself to a good partner, which can then store it cheaply, store it effectively, and something which can be relied on.
Steve, if you look at technology per se, I think what we are seeing is that data management is getting more idiot-proofed and hostage-proof. What I mean is really You got to hire people who know how to deal with technologies like tiering, or thin provisioning, etc. And that's getting more and more automated, which is great. So we don't have to worry about hiring the required people at the very expensive salaries that Gaurav mentioned earlier, and that is a good thing. But what is still not happening is really information architecture, right? When you look at all these profligating endpoints, we are really not using the data for information to help the business, and it has to be driven by information architecture, which we are really not going anywhere near. And I do not think that individual companies are proficient enough to do that information architecture very well. We do need help from vendors like Dell and others.
One more thing that I think is lacking when it comes to solutions available in this entire storage field is, while we have talked about tiering, and tiering helps you prioritize your data in terms of what's old and what's new, and what's more frequently used and what's not. But overall, what is needed is to move towards an approach where we can somehow prioritize your data on relevance. So say one organization, for example, videos of a certain nature might be very relevant, while another only databases and structured data inside those is relevant, while in a third one, emails might be more relevant. So somehow we need to storage solutioning where we can have relevance-based information architecture. That this is relevant, this needs to reside here, this is something that's not so relevant or not so important, this can be residing on certain different kind of storages. So what we are lacking right now as far as solutions from the storage providers are concerned, or the service providers concerned, is relevance-based storage strategies. And as a result, most customers are creating their own policies around that and trying to build their policies, and obviously that does lead to a sort of sprawl, and that's what needs to be solved in some ways. And that's why information architecture actually does play a very, very important role. But yeah, you need expertise from people and solutions for that.
Let me say a few words. Since I'm getting beaten up here, it's time for me to change it. No, but in all honesty, the one thing I have learned, and I talk to several customers daily, weekly. The one thing I've really learned is, you know, honestly, in a lot of cases, when you drive a customer conversation, a lot of customers start the conversation at the technology side as opposed to the needs side, right? A lot of, and that's why you get this propagation of, hey, tiering and automation and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's all about the business need that really matters. So a lot of folks that I talk to, I encourage them in terms of, hey, there's only one person that can tell me, you know, what is relevant, and that's you. There's no outside company that can come in and do that. And you know, some of you have done that and are really good at that and are reaping benefits. For example, when I asked about archiving, you raised your hand. And that's a classic needs-based analysis of, hey, I need this information, I need it protected, and I need it on a cheaper medium of storage, right? And that's the one thing I would challenge. If you've not done that needs assessment, that's something you should all absolutely look at doing, because the absolute wrong way to approach this problem is, what are the technologies out there and what they can do to solve me, as opposed to, hey, what are my business needs, and let me now go put pressure on all of these technology vendors to give what I need, as opposed to sell what they're trying to sell me.
But then, you know, that needs the vendors also to get into consultative selling mode. As a user, I can only tell you that there's a tap that's dripping. It's up to you to find out whether I really need a sprinkler system.
Yeah, and it's a valid point. Like, you know, when I talk to customers about virtualization, one of the biggest pain points that I see is the fact that, you know, a lot of customers come back and say, hey, you'll talk about virtualization, but it's not true virtualization. Because the way customers define virtualization is, I don't care what array I have. I don't care what hard drives I have. You just basically present this entire lump of storage. Honestly, whether it be Compellent or Ecologic or EMC or HP, I don't care, right? And that's the true nature, and we've got to get there, honestly. We're not there yet, right? And the reason we're not there yet is because everybody has a lot of pride in their own metadata, right? And they all believe that they can do it better. But there's a lot of standards, there's a lot of work that's been done on simple things like rate definitions, right? How do you store data on what is metadata, what are rate definitions across? So we're getting there. We're not there yet, honestly. I think the day we get there, that's gonna, you know, solve a lot of those whole integration problems and looking at data just as one repository, as opposed to one EMC repository or Dell repository or HP repository.
I think I agree with Murli. Say, customers mostly may not be very comfortable talking about the data, the information part, even though it may be not very efficiently managed. And the partners, whoever engage, I think it's required that they collaborate well, engage closely, work closely with the customers to understand the pain areas and then go and give the solutions. And technology, okay, you probably have a host of technology today which can be leveraged to create a efficient solution. I think that marriage has to happen.
So can we separate the business side of the data and the ownership from the technology side of the bits of storing it, growing it, similarly to the way that we virtualized and separated storage from processing or computing processing power from applications. Do you see us getting to that same idea that the business owns the data and will control the data, and IT is simply going to be the enabler of where that goes and not so defining of how it's used?
I'd love to say yes, but I also know it's not true. The problem is this: current data, you can fix ownership. So what's current, what's used live for business or maybe used for reporting, etc., you can pretty well fix ownership. But old data is an orphan. Nobody owns it till somebody wants it. So you got a problem. You know, for 10 years, nobody will tell you I need that data. And in the 10th year, all of a sudden, who had the data? IT did. So IT's got to produce it. So the ownership, while logically correct, practically moves to technology. And that is the issue. I wear two hats, so you know, I kind of have the conversation with myself in a mirror.
I fully agree. I think currently there's a huge disconnect between the business who owns the data versus the IT. I mean, currently everything is put on IT. That they need to produce the data whenever required, and nobody takes the ownership of the data. And they keep on, and the business keeps on demanding more and more storage because they have to dump more and more data, whereas nobody is looking into the data, analyzing it, and taking ownership. I think that's something we need to bridge the gap.
I tend to agree with Steve in the sense that yes, the custodianship is there today and will always remain. So IT is a custodian, they need to be able to produce the data. But that does not really put any boundaries on where do you store data, whom do you outsource it to. As long as that custodianship of data remains, I think that we are moving to a point where business owns the data and IT remains the custodian and has the discretion of choice of either, you know, whichever way they want to store it. As long as that is reliable, that is conforms to the policy, that should be fine.
Well, and that's where I think the entire gamut of technologies of deduplication and archiving and tiering and all that comes in, because see, that's a fact of life. Ultimately, business doesn't want to be involved in the nitty-gritties of having to filter out, okay, this is important, this is not, this is what I need today, this is what I will need 6 months later or 6 years later. So that's a overhead that they consider on their decision making, which they are better left out of. So what we need is solutions there which can help you handle this problem by keeping taking down the information to the right place in that in your entire storage solution, where while the information and the data is available and can be made available when it's needed, but even though the business might not decide, "Oh, this is what I want now or what I want later," but the entire set of solutions around deduplication, archiving, and the entire thing have to be smart enough to be able to achieve that, because that's a fact of life. As he mentioned, wearing the two hats of the business user as well as the IT guy. It's not simple. It's not even fair to ask the business user to make that decision to some extent.
Of data. So when you talk to hospitals and you go talk to the person who runs the MRI labs and all, they honestly don't know what they don't know, right? And it's unfair to a certain degree, and they just expect IT to come up with that solution, right? But that's the world we live in. I'll give you a simple example. The other day, I was talking to some folks at Johns Hopkins, which is a pretty major university in the US. Right now, they're testing out technologies where an MRI, one single MRI per patient, it's going to be 2 terabytes. We're talking 1 MRI per patient. Today, if I take an MRI scan and store it, it's about 5 MB, 2 MB. Right? We're talking about 2 terabytes on one single picture. If I, it's a morbid example, but if I use a person who's detected with cancer at 25 years of age, and if that has to be maintained, those images have to be maintained for the next 50 years. Can you even imagine how much storage requirement? So in all honesty, I love that point, because the business doesn't know what it does not know at this point in time, and the pressure is right back on IT to maintain that flexibility, so as to say, so that you can actually get up to some of those challenges.
So how do we go back and balance that, though? Because we've still got to appease the CFO, who's not going. He's going to look at the business, but he's going to look at the costs that we're incurring, and he won't see it as a business cost. He will see it as an IT cost.
Part of that is related to the previous question, Steve. What is changing is our ability to consider disconnected storage as a single pool, a logical pool, using storage virtualization, accessing it through SOIP, storage over Internet Protocol, and automated storage management. With that, I expect a lot of the efforts that IT is putting into managing storage to go from managing the physical bits and pieces, helping information and helping business. And I really think this discussion about increasing storage and exponentially increasing storage is going to be a reality. So the conversation with the CFO is not going to be on dollar per TB. That will be there, but revenues per dollar invested per TB. Mm-hmm. And I believe that as IT departments spend more time on how to help the business with information as opposed to managing the bits and pieces, that conversation is going to get much more easier.
So we've got a dilemma that one of the areas that we have talked about for the last 15 years is making sure that we are, as CIOs, we are fully aligned with the business and having that seat at the table to continue the conversation. And yet the areas that we talk about are highly technical. And I don't know about your executive teams, but I know mine. If I go much beyond TCP/IP, they kind of glaze over. So how do we take that conversation back to them in terms that they can understand and make them realize that the future of the organization is dependent upon the data?
I think here it's worthwhile phrasing the late Steve Jobs, where he said that the consumer does not really know what he wants. And you design something and show him or her the possibilities. Similarly, it's with users. We took Web 2.0 wasn't a user requirement. Gigabit Ethernet wasn't a user requirement. The user requirement said, I need to move images. You made it possible, you went and showed the user what is possible. So I think we need to get creative in that sense. We need to be able to understand what the users are saying and be able to show them what's possible, rather than look at it and saying, hey, tell me what you want me to do.
Yeah, and I would say that, if we as IT people become, talk the language of business, and abstract the technology part of it, and really see why does business need to know, about tiers and stuff like that. So if the data requirement has increased from 5 MB per patient to 2 terabytes, yes, there is a huge explosion. We need to find the smartest way of doing it and being able to do it competitively with respect to, say, other people who are doing it, giving business the edge that, we are not lagging behind or our cost is not more. And then it's purely a business case. You might need 100 terabytes and we need to find smart ways of storing 100 terabytes. So I think as long as we kind of break it down into very simple business terms as to the amount of storage, the speed, the security, recoverability and stuff like that, that should generally be a simple conversation.
Because there are, in IT services, there are 8,000 CIOs that I need to deal with.
So how do you find the governance trying to, that sounds amazingly like herding cats. If you get 3 developers in a room with a single problem, within 30 minutes you've got 5 solutions that are all very viable. With 8,000 CIOs, how do you get consensus?
It's opinions. At the end of the day, I'm glad that we have an org structure that allows us to take the solution that we feel is the best to be applied to the problem. And as long as the accountability remains with us, we do have the freedom to go and execute.
I think that is an interesting point because when I talk to a lot of CIOs today, it's almost it's a dual role, right? One example I always use, you ask a room full of CIOs whether they like chargebacks, and pretty much everybody raises their hands. You go back and ask the same IT department heads that work for you, do you guys like chargebacks? And absolutely nobody raises their hand, right? So it's this whole cultural shift, and that's the role, honestly, I see of the CIO to a great degree. It's not just technology as an enabler, it's also process and cultural shifts that they have to bring into their organization. And honestly, a lot of people, technology is just one aspect of this conversation. There's this people aspect and process aspect that you've got to get tuned with. And unless you get people, process, and technologies, you just don't get to the kind of transformation a lot of you require, to continue having that seat at the table.
So that does raise an interesting point. How do we change the culture within the organization to make them realize that not only is the data critical, but our processes need to change not only as an IT workforce, but as the business consumes data itself?
One way I think this should be taken up is for IT to try and be more involved at the inception stage, let's say, of a solution. So usually what you would find, for example, this entire example of MRIs being, each MRI becoming a 2 terabyte set of slides which have to be stored maybe for many years through the medical history of the patient. So the point here is that as long as the entire technology is being created, or the organization that's adopting it is adopting it with the involvement of IT right from the beginning rather than as an afterthought, there can be a lot of consensus as well as you can say a lot of meaningful solutions possible. So when we say how do you get the business users sensitized, so the idea is to be involved right from the beginning, rather than coming in as an afterthought. And this doesn't happen so easily in many organizations. What you would usually find is a business decision would get taken first, and then at the execution stage is when the IT department, so to say, gets involved. So the key thing on data as well is to when the department or the organization unit that's handling this data and maintaining it through its life cycle gets involved in the solutioning and in the application architecture from the beginning and from the problem discussion itself, the users can also be sensitized to that problem. They can think through how to maintain it, what's needed, what's not needed, what to keep, what not to keep. Those decisions can be taken right in the beginning rather than later having to plug and play those. So this is like, it's a very, very vague thought, and it's easier said than done, but that's one thing that's absolutely essential. And that's kind of like on the path of IT becoming more strategic to the organization rather than just as the nuts and bolts.
It is that the IT department does come at the back, automating the processes to make it more efficient and get the costs out. Unless it's a company like Amazon where IT is core to their business. I know, and this question has come up a lot. It's the holy grail for the CIO, right? How does he become more relevant to the so relevant to the organization that he's at the table when forward-looking decisions are taken, as opposed to him coming at the back and automating the processes? I don't think it'll happen. Really, being practical about it. And to your question, I think the way we've approached is that we've defined the process owners, whether they are running payroll or finance or HR or whatever. The process owners have to own their processes, and they have to work with us to make the processes more efficient. Wherever we have taken the initiative to do process re-engineering to make the processes more efficient, we've faced hostility. So you've got to go to the process owner, tell them they own the process, and help them make their process better, and then automate. That's the only way we can make the organization more efficient.
I would like to bring a slightly different perspective. I feel that we in IT don't do a very good job in bringing the visibility of the cost, and it is seen as one big black box and a total bill. So if we were to kind of bring visibility on the cost of any process efficiency or inefficiency, nothing convinces business like a cost number. That will itself often drive the behaviors to change, the processes to change, and the culture to change, because every organization wants to remain competitive. So I think a very good way to achieve would be to give the cost visibility of a specific thing.
Yeah, what is required is a true business IT partnership. And as my colleague said, obviously the IT gets involved only post the particular initiative or the decision has been taken. But one of the things which we follow is that we have a particular measurement of IT metrics which asks certain simple questions like, by doing this initiative, how much of manpower can you save, or what is the time to market, and so on and so forth. So it's a set of around 20-21 parameters. Now obviously what we have realized is that when you start asking business these questions, even they start thinking, and in the end the outcome is you get those priorities out of those 21 which are only about 1 or 2 priorities, which helps the IT to focus on meeting those priorities and help the business. Typically what tends to happen is that IT goes overboard saying that okay, there's a good project, now let's look at technology, let's try to bring X technology or a Y technology, whereas what the business user is interested is in ensuring that okay, these are those 1 or 2 pain areas. He wants that IT to address those pain areas immediately within a short span of time, and then look at the other things at a later point of time. So once you follow this kind of a matrix, at least in our case it has helped us tremendously, and build that IT business partnership. And as a result of this, even the business guys realizes that because it has been successful for them, that in the subsequent conversations, they start involving us right at the planning stage itself.
So do we ever see the ability to get beyond this availability versus cost as our storage continues to grow? Do we finally hit that point that there's an economy of scale that we can actually afford to provide both the storage that they want at a cost that's acceptable to the business?
If you make it an engineering issue, yes, you can. But I'm not making a comment on the regulatory issues involved, because that is what will complicate the whole problem. Especially in today's world, regulation is basically going to determine, going forward, what your ultimate storage requirements are going to be. It's not going to be usability of data.
I agree with my colleague that ultimately what is really hindering a mass scale adoption of cloud-based storage is are the regulatory issues, the issues related to security, and they have probably not been addressed comprehensively. If they are, then the economies of scale will definitely drive businesses to go for cloud storage in a very quick way.
If you look at storage cost versus total IT cost, I don't think it's significant enough to stand out as a sore thumb in discussions with business and the CFO. If you look at an average of, say, $2,000 per terabyte, and you want 100 terabytes, you're only talking 200,000. It's not a big deal. But if you are in a business that requires real-time critical data, like the example Gaurav mentioned, and you need 1,000 terabytes storage, you're talking about perhaps 6 million. Then it starts to stand out. So the good thing is that today it is not that big that it's an issue.
But then you've also got the soft costs associated with putting it on a spindle is one thing, being able to optimize that data, turning it into actionable information, the cost associated with the labor or the expertise to bring it there. Is that an IT cost or is that a business cost?
I think the intelligent data management tools which are probably coming in, or which is the direction which is taking, I think that will help in reducing the cost. That's the reason why this question was raised, that do you expect storage costs to double in next 2 years or 3 years? So very little people raised hand. So we expect that with intelligent data management technologies gripping in, storage cost will reduce compared to the way the storage has been growing.
Gaurav, do you see working more with business units themselves, with the business drivers, or are you still working primarily with the IT teams on trying to solve some of these problems?
It depends on the sector. What we have noticed is if you get into very specialized areas like education, healthcare, or banking and securities, because of the whole fundamental role of IT changing, because CIOs now have a seat at the table, we're actually talking a lot more to the business owners. So we have today, for example, in the healthcare space, Stephen, since you're very familiar with that example, we have as many discussions with directors of the labs as we do with the IT department. In the banking and security space, I could use the same. In fact, in the retail space, it very much happens that we have a lot more conversations with the operations folks who manage, the day-to-day operational items of retail, as opposed to just the IT department. Because at the end of the day, the conversation is pretty simple. It's who determines whether my video surveillance runs at 32 frames a second or 10 frames a second. It's actually the person who owns that retail, and it's the business owner, right? So you've got to start the discussion out there. And the good part is, what we have seen definitely is the IT department is getting much closer. And a lot of you folks mentioned, and it surprised me a little, it might be industry specific, but I see the IT department having a huge say, in the formulation of strategies in spaces like healthcare and banking securities. no longer are they at the very back end. Now, there are certain areas, for example, decision support systems, that's a great area which is, hey, a business is driving this need, and suddenly then the IT is brought in and you say, hey, but wait a second, the kind of infrastructure we have, the latency in that infrastructure is not going to allow you to make real-time decisions making. And there's some disconnects out there, but like in a lot of spaces like healthcare, education, all of those spaces, I see IT being absolutely forefront at the table and in the discussion along with the business owner.
Good. I don't know where we are on time, but I thought I'd open it up and see if we don't have a few minutes for questions from the floor. We've got a great panel up here. Stump them. Anyone? Someone? Bueller? Bueller?
Hi, this is Manjit from Ericsson. Several of you have spoken about various aspects when controlling the storage. I feel that at user level or whoever is our users, we cannot demand them to come up with the optimum requirements. It is up to the IT to find the solution and the technology. First of all, at the application level, the audio and video files, which takes a lot of storage, at this level itself, we should be able to concentrate on reducing the size. That is by having efficient codecs and different various other mechanisms. The second level where we can control it is the storage level itself. Right now, the shrinking capacity, the shrinking capacity, the archiving and all. What is the percentage? Maybe it is giving a 60% and all. Why not it can give 90%? We need to think in that line. And then third is the cost of hardware itself. Right now, you see the SAS drives, 600 GB SAS drive, is much costlier than a SATA drive. Can we concentrate there? Because like 10 years back, the cost of the storage was pretty high when compared to today. When we are talking about the next 5 years, the cost should be much lesser than what it is today. So that is one factor which can do this. And then one very important thing is the policy to purge or delete the unwanted data. That is not in place right now. One solution could be to have an SLAs with the user projects, or also we need to set up the government policies like when it is patient's data or the user data, or for example banking details of a user. You are not supposed to keep it till eternity. You should be able to delete it say after 5 years or 10 years of time if that is not useful. So that policy setup has to be there. Then Anila said rightly that whenever we are starting a project, it is better and optimum to have IT peoples to design the hardware architecture itself along with the users. So having that in place, I think we can have an efficient data management when the project is running. So these are the thoughts which I have right now. Do you think that this is possible?
I'll take part of this one. I think it's absolutely possible. I mean, I think there are technologies that exist today that allow you. It's funny. Like you talked about codecs that allow you to shrink data. That was an 11 MB presentation that I did. When I tried to WinZip it, it came to like 10.3. So it was completely useless in all honesty. But if you look at deduplication and compression and some of the innovative technologies that are out there, you absolutely can do that. I use the Facebook example. I mean, in all honesty, we have an example. We have technology today. I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but if I took 2 photographs and the brown of the eyes in the 2 photographs was the same, I can actually redo that and store it only once. You're talking about an incredible amount of savings. The problem is with a lot of that, again, is it's brand new technology. Now you need new consoles, you need new users, you need new processes to manage that. So that change comes over time. And that acceptability to all of these technologies and and the confidence comes over time. Like, you know, in banking and security space today, there is no regulation that says whether I can dedupe, compress, and what are the requirements around rehydrating. So I can go and talk about Ocarina all day long, but if the CIO from a banking standpoint of a Goldman Sachs or Lehman Brothers, whoever it is, right, does not know what the policy is around rehydration of data, they're not going to make that decision. So a lot of this is also industry driven, and in general there has to be a lot more explanation to some of the regulatory items and things like that. Because I agree. I think a lot of the storage requirements is going to come from two places. One is this whole end user expansion of data, and then the other is regulatory. And long-term retention is entirely regulatory, nothing else.
No, you take something like Google. Previously, in case you guys remember, maybe even 5 years ago, we allocated storage space on the email server in terms of maybe kilobytes, and if you're specifically generous on that particular day, you're allowed to give some more MB. Today, do you ever do that? The guys were talking, gigs are the minimum that a person expects, and you know, people like Google come and tell you, hey, why delete? So, you know, the world's changed in terms of user expectations, and there's no point trying to put the genie back in the bottle. Now, what you got to do is manage it as efficiently as you can, at the lowest possible cost. But you can't get rid of it. The genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that typically it will be not this or that. So you would work on the ways to compress data, to reduce data. So if you take that example of 2 terabytes for an MRI, if there is a smarter way to bring it to 1 terabyte. So it's not that we should not explore that, or we are not going to explore that, but you would still have a storage problem. Yeah, so, you know, whatever that data is, try to reduce it and stuff like that, but is that data going to come down to what it is today? It's definitely not going to. You will still see a 10-time explosion in the data. So you need smarter ways to store data, as you need smarter ways to compress, deduplicate, and reduce the amount of data that you have.
I think that's a really good point. And the only thing, the proof point that I'd add to that is compare the cost of a 300 gig SCSI drive 7 years ago to a 600 gig SAS drive today. You will see that the 600 gig SAS drive is actually cheaper. So when you look at the cost of storage, that's come down over the years pretty drastically. The problem is there's just too much of it. And you'll never make that equation work, because that explosion is just going to continue.
I think most of the companies have tiered storage architecture, but the thing which is missing is the intelligence, right? What data needs to sit on the tier 1 storage and what needs to be moved to tier 2, tier 3. I think most of this is happening manually these days. But there has to be an intelligence built into the system that analyzes the data pattern and moves the data automatically to tier 2, tier 3 storage.
Okay, I'm going to say this shit. Absolutely have to say it. Look at compellent. I'm sorry.
I think one very important point that you mentioned was the policy part, and that's where I think IT and business need to sit down together and formulate the right policy for data retention and archival and everything. It's also about visibility, making it visible to business users that, okay, this is what we are, this is the cost of doing something, and if we tweak it a bit together, we can actually get to it. So the policy part is where IT and business need to be very, very closely involved, formulate the right policy on retention, archival, and all these aspects, and then put it into place. And that's what will be that certainly will be a part of the solution to the entire data management issue that we are debating here. So that's certainly along with the technology solution, the solutions of deduplication, archival, compression, that's one part to it, and the policy. And IT needs to also understand the regulatory aspects themselves. So users could, for example, say that, okay, this regulation requires this to be done. IT can get into, can actually go through it themselves and understand whether that really is correct and take their own sensible decision, informed decision there. So that I think is going to be very important.
Thank you.
Can I ask a couple of questions to the audience?
Absolutely.
Question number 1. Do you want tapes to go away? among all the CIOs standing over here, is there anybody who says he loves tapes and doesn't want them to go away? Tapes, long spools. So apparently everybody wants tapes to be around. So which means tapes will never go away. So the second question is redundant. I was hoping to get some idea of whether people feel that tapes will go. Obviously.
I just want to add, I think tapes have been replaced by smart storage like hard disk, removable hard disks, but I don't think they'll go away 100%.
So if you look at Dell, for example, Dell has discontinued DATs on their servers, and we had a huge challenge when because at all the retail outlets, all the distributed setup that we had. So how do we do our backups? So we moved on to a disk-based suite. So, but at a data center level, we still used.
I think it comes down to cost. Just far too cheap a medium. Now it's not a highly reliable medium, so you don't put any mission critical data on it unless it's well aged past its time. But it's just incredibly cheap. I mean, if you look at tape technologies, and you know, I'll be the first one to say it's not the most exciting technology in these days, but if you look at tape technology and compare it to hard drives, tapes as a cost per terabytes have come down almost as much as a regular hard drive has. It's amazing how much progress that technology has also made.
And they will go away when they will become as cheap. And
when hard drives become as cheap as tape, yeah.
I think you should also look at the total cost of manageability.
That's true.
With the tapes, the entire amount of time that you'll be spending in managing that, the archiving of that, all
That's a great point.
So with that, probably disk-based backups would make sense.
Real quickly, though, as we're talking about tape, and we will wrap up here, but has anyone tried to recover anything from a 5-year-old puddle of oxide?
I don't answer that.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I think we're out of time. Big round of applause for our panel. We have time for one? Yeah. Please.
I just wanted to talk about the tape part of it. I think when Gaurav was also pointing, it's the cheapest available medium which is being used. Today, I don't think we really need a tape drive. That's because at the end of the day, does it make any sense to have the data which, when needed, is not available back? So those were the days where we used tape, where we never had intelligence. Today, when you look at the technology innovations that has happened and the cost that has come down way far, I don't think we need to really look at tapes anymore. Instead, we should look at the intelligent part of it, how quickly we can get back the data. The purpose of tape was to archive. Now, when we don't get back the data when we need it, what's the use of having a cheaper medium or what's the use of having a costlier medium? So I suggest that all CIOs should look at that. It's only a regulation that in India we use tapes only because of the regulations. But otherwise, I don't think any CIOs would go with tapes anymore. That's my.
And I would just ask, as you go through e-discovery, trying to explain to the attorneys or the judge that because that information is 3 years old and you have archived it on tape, and it's no longer available, does that work when you go to court and cannot produce the data that they're asking for?
It doesn't work. So at the end of the day, it doesn't serve your purpose. So whether it comes at free or it comes at what cost, doesn't matter. So the objective is, are we able to achieve anything out of it? If yes, it makes sense to look at it. So today I don't think, because of the technologies that have been demonstrated by many partners or vendors, many companies that's coming with a lot of innovations, I don't think there is any thought that we need to spend on tapes anymore. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Steve Porter and his panel.